Hello everyone. Today we're diving into 4 unsolved murders from across Canada that aren't very well known. We have a man found in a ditch, a body found in a septic tank of an abandoned farm, a mother killed in her own home, and another killed while working the night shift. All are unsolved and all of these people still need justice. And let's start off with one case that was recommended to me by a family member. In the afternoon hours of July 3, 2007, police would end up receiving a call from a citizen who had found a body in a ditch located near Central Avenue and Agra Road in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. As you can see from Google Maps here, this area is quite rural and desolate. Upon arrival, police would confirm that a body was in fact at that location, and they would identify the person as 44-year-old Paul Theodore Jacobson. Paul's last known whereabouts was at a home located on the 600 block of University Drive on the evening of July 1st, 2007. Again, as you can see here from Google Maps, his body would later be found about a 15-minute drive or 9 kilometers away from where he was last seen. According to the Saskatoon police, witness interviews indicated that Paul had arrived at that home with a female friend. However, that female friend seems to never have been identified. She would also reportedly leave the home shortly after arriving there. Now, I have seen that police have asked this woman to come forward. She may have information that may lead to figuring out what happened to Paul and who murdered him. However, again, I haven't seen anything indicating online that they did find this woman. Now, a family member of Paul's asked me to cover this case because Paul didn't end up in that ditch by himself. Police have never released Paul's cause of death. However, they have confirmed that he died by homicide. And it's been nearly 2 decades and there are still no answers as to who murdered Paul. Who is that female friend and what does she know, if anything? There's so little information on his case that it's also hard to speculate what happened to him and who may have done it. But at the end of the day, who murdered Paul and why? Because that person may still be walking our streets. On April 13th of 1977, a farmer would walk into an Alberta police station claiming he'd found a body in a septic tank of an abandoned home that he owned when he went to look for a pump that he needed for a new home that he was building nearby. He'd provide police with a shoe and a woolen sock that he'd pulled out of the tank as proof. Upon arrival at the rural farm, it's reported that police spent hours scooping gooey liquid out of the tank using an ice cream pail before they would eventually discover the horrific truth. A man's body, in fact, did end up being found inside of that septic tank, which was located on an abandoned farm 55 kilometers east of Tofield, Alberta, which is east of Edmonton. Now, this farm was owned by a couple named Mavis and Charlie McLeod. They had a 15-year-old son at the time who would eventually tell the TV show Fifth Estate that he had no information of what happened, or any of the details surrounding this murder. The victim had been reportedly tortured, beaten, sexually mutilated, and then shot twice in the chest with a .32 caliber weapon. His body had also been burned with what police theorized was a common household butane torch. The body was then wrapped with a yellow bedsheet and tied with a nylon rope, before it was then dumped headfirst into the 1.8 meter deep septic tank. After this, the killer then completely covered the body in lime in hopes of destroying it, which in the end it did end up destroying the body past recognition. The man ended up being found wearing blue jeans, a blue Levi's shirt, gray work socks, and imitation wallaby shoes. Due to the evidence found, police theorized that the man had been tied to a bed by his wrists on top of that yellow bed sheet, and they believe that he was tied by his wrists to the bed because the burns stopped just short of his wrists. Large burns were also found on the inner sleeves and pant legs of the man's clothing, as well as on one of his socks. The entire crotch of his pants had also been sheared away with something sharp enough to cut right through the zipper, which police theorized could be farming shears. During autopsy, doctors would also find that the man's genitals had been slashed and mutilated with a sharp knife. RCMP Sergeant Ed Lammerts worked the case back then, saying, and I quote, "To impose that much pain on someone who is most likely alive is extremely bizarre," end quote. At the time, police were unable to identify the body, so they ended up nicknaming the man Septic Tank Sam, which some people have found disrespectful. But that is what he was called back then. That is what all the newspapers reported him as, Septic Tank Sam. The man's body would eventually be buried in an unmarked grave in an Edmonton cemetery. 2 years would pass with no answers. So police would end up using a forensic artist to use clay to reconstruct a face for Septic Tank Sam. In 1988, the RCMP released a new photo reconstruction of the man's body as well in hopes it would spark some tips. But it wouldn't be until after 2018 in the arrest of the Golden State Killer, a big case that most of us most likely know by now. He ended up being captured due to genealogical testing, and that showed other law enforcement groups, it seems like, that it may be possible to solve some of these older cold cases. So the police in Alberta ended up seeing this working in the US for cases, so they ended up submitting Septic Tank Sam's DNA to Othram Labs in Texas. which specializes in the recovery and analysis of human DNA from degraded or contaminated forensic evidence, which, as you could guess, Septic Tank Sam's body, because of the lime, had been greatly destroyed. And in January of 2021, nearly 44 years after his body had been found, police were able to identify him as 26-year-old Gordon Edwin Sanderson. 26-year-old Gordon, also known as Gordie to his friends and family, was an Indigenous man born on October 22nd of 1950 in Manitoba, Saskatchewan. When Gordie was just 9 years old, he'd been separated from his family during the horrific 60s scoop, which refers to a mass removal of Aboriginal children from their families into the welfare system, which was forced by the government without the family's consents. Definitely something that isn't spoken about enough in Canada. It's absolutely horrific what happened to our Indigenous people, just how they were treated. To think that people could just come in and steal your children from you. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy to think that that happened. And Gordie, unfortunately, was one of those victims. So Gordie, being a child back then, was forcibly removed from his family and placed into the foster care system, which you can imagine how that could affect a child, what that would do to someone, not only his family, but him as well. It was said that Gordie lived a very hard life. By the 1970s, Gordie was now an adult and he was living in Edmonton, Alberta. Gordie was last heard from by his family when he had made plans to go meet his younger brother Arthur in Calgary, but sadly Gordie never made that meeting. His sister, who had lost touch with both of her brothers, would end up reporting Gordie missing in the early 1980s. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, Gordie has been identified, but why hasn't his case been solved, considering he was found in a well on a private property? Well, both Mavis and Charlie McLeod have now since passed away, and their son doesn't have any answers. He was only a kid at the time, and from all accounts, the property that he was found on was abandoned at the time. And the McLeods did own it, but they didn't live on it, and they didn't often visit it. It was just a fluke, I guess, that day Charlie had gone there to go look for this pump that he needed, and he was like, well, maybe I'll go check this old well, and found the body. So I guess they somehow cleared Mavis and Charlie. Maybe they never did, and it's just now that they've passed away, it's one of those open-ended cases, unfortunately. However, I guess because it was abandoned, there is a possibility that someone may have known it was abandoned and may have put him in there to hide him, knowing that it was abandoned and no one was going to check for a very long time. Mavis and Charlie's son saying, and I quote, "It's such a sad story because Dad never talked about it. I didn't know any details about it. It's good for everybody that way. I mean, it's still sad what happened. I just can't believe it." End quote. Thankfully, Gordon's sister is still alive, so at least she now knows that her brother isn't just missing. She has some closure in a way, but she doesn't have closure for what happened to him. As we know from the details, Gordon was horrifically tortured before he was murdered. He was burned, he was mutilated, he was tied to a bed as far as they think. So whose bed was he tied to? It's been so long now. It's been nearly 50 years. How are police ever going to find more evidence on that? It's not like they can find the ropes 50 years later. It's not like maybe they can even tie it to a specific bed. Now, that bed sheet could have answers, but because of how destroyed the body was, and I'm sure the fabric as well possibly of that bed sheet, the chances of getting other DNA evidence off of that seems to be slim. I mean, it's not impossible. They ended up identifying Gordon, so is it possible they might have found other DNA evidence that just hasn't been linked to anyone? That I don't know. But Gordon's sister is still alive out there. He still has family out there that wants answers. He deserves justice. It also turns out that he has a daughter. And that daughter still does not know what happened to her father. That is horrific. Who did that? They could still be walking our streets.
For decades, his name was as mysterious as his murder. But after over 40 years of being called Septic Tank Sam, based only on where his body was gruesomely discovered, RCMP have a name. Thanks to DNA testing, they know it is Gordon Edwin Sanderson, or Gordie for short, and they're hoping the next step is finding out who did it.
A sense of mourning, but also relief. Definitely some feelings of anger towards what Gordie went through in his life and what was done to him.
In January, RCMP found a DNA match on the remains of a man found in an abandoned farmhouse septic tank in April of 1977, burned and sexually mutilated. Able to connect with his sister, Joyce, finding Gordie had a hard life. Born in Manitoba in 1950, taken from his family in the 60s scoop, facing addictions and known to police. He was living in Edmonton in the 70s, and he had a daughter. RCMP now saying they are looking for information on his business associates to hopefully solve when Gordie was killed and by who.
Over 40 years has gone by, and so we are gathering that information, evaluating it, talking to witnesses, and pursuing this as quickly as we can.
There is a lot of speculation on this case, whether Gordon may have done something that angered someone, so that's why they mutilated him the way they did. But there's obviously no evidence of that. There's just a lot of speculation on Reddit, considering that his genitals were specifically mutilated. But Gordon is a victim here, so considering we don't have any information that he did anything to someone, such as SA of sorts, but it does make you wonder why someone would horrifically mutilate him the way they did. Why would they tie him up to something and burn him as well? It's just so strange why someone would torture him the way they did. And it makes you wonder, is there still some sick individual out there who may have tortured and mutilated other young men and women? Could there be a killer out there that was just doing this? Or could this have been an isolated incident? Clearly, the person that did this to Gordon went to extensive lengths to hide his body and try to destroy evidence, which is why some people believe that this was professionally done by someone who knows what they're doing. There's also the question of, could this have been more than one person involved? But with such limited information, it's so hard to speculate at this point. But what I do know is that Gordon's killer has never been caught, and they are also still walking our streets. 38-year-old Barbara Elaine Chapman was a mother of 2 children living north of the village of Frankfort, Ontario, a rural town along the Trent River with a population of 1,800 people. Before moving to this home, Barbara had been living with her husband at a farm near the town of Sterling. However, she moved after going through a bitter divorce with him. On the morning of January 23rd of 1984, Barbara got up, made breakfast for her kids, got them ready for school, and sent them to the school bus. This would be the last time that her children would ever see their mother alive. After her kids got on the bus, Barbara ended up calling her mother on the phone and talking to her while she did chores around the house. At 4 p.m., when Barbara's 12-year-old daughter returned home from school, she got into the house but couldn't find her mother anywhere. After searching for more than an hour, the little girl would eventually find her mother's body in the garage. Barbara's cause of death has never been revealed to the public. However, that is a horrific thing for a 12-year-old to witness, let alone any child, to find their mother's body in the garage of their home, or just in their home in general after getting off from school. You know, she was probably excited to tell her mom about her day, and then to not find her, and then to find her mother dead, that is traumatizing beyond belief. I can't even imagine. A family friend saying, and I quote, "It was a shock to everyone. That poor kid. It would have scarred her for life. Barb was one of the kindest ladies you could ever meet. She extended herself to everyone she met. Everyone just adored her. She should still be with us." End quote. And there were a lot of anonymous quotes in newspapers. However, people seem to be scared to outright speak using their own names. And it makes me wonder if everyone had an idea of who may have been responsible for this. One anonymous source stating, and I quote, "Barb looked after me when I was a kid. She could be feisty and would dig in her heels if she felt strongly about something." End quote. What police have revealed, however, is that Barbara was murdered. And there's been a lot of rumors surrounding Barbara's murder, such as if she was tied up before she was killed. Some speculating that the crime scene was tidy, as if it was professionally done. So it makes you wonder, could a serial killer be involved here then if it was professionally done? Could it have been a hitman, possibly hired by someone close to her? Or could it have been her ex-husband himself? They were going through a bitter divorce, and police always look at those closest first, but it makes me wonder, if he hasn't been arrested after all these years, he must have had some kind of good alibi. Frankfort residents and those who knew Barbara have said they have been forever haunted by her murder. And with new technology such as genealogical testing, there is hope that Barbara's case could eventually be solved. It makes me wonder if they found any DNA evidence under her nails, possibly. But it's been around 40 years, and Barbara's children still don't have answers as to who killed their mother. The OPP is also offering a $50,000 reward for information on Barbara Chapman's unsolved murder. If you want to remain anonymous, there is a $2,000 reward available. 35-year-old Melissa Ivy Chaboyer was a single mother to a 17-year-old son named Anthony, and for nearly a decade had been a foster mother to 20 to 30 children. She was also a Métis woman who lived in Thompson, Manitoba, working full-time with developmentally challenged adults and multiple other jobs to help support herself and her children, including working as a part-time taxi driver for the North Star Taxi Company in Thompson. And she did this so that she could buy more Christmas presents for her children. Just overall, from everything that I read about Melissa, she seemed like an incredibly loving and giving person. The kind of foster mother that any child would have wanted. On the night of Friday, November 25th of 2005, Melissa left her mother's home after a visit and started her night shift driving her white cab for North Star Cab, her vehicle number 302. Now, Thompson, Manitoba is actually ranked one of the most dangerous cities in Canada, which is something I didn't know because I actually have a police officer friend who lives in Thompson, Manitoba. And he often used to tell me stories about, working his shifts, and sometimes it was quite dangerous. But I didn't realize how dangerous this town was until doing my research for this case. Not long after midnight, which was now November 26th, Melissa was dispatched to pick someone up at the Thompson Arena, located inside the University College of the North. It's unknown who the caller was and how many passengers there were. Minutes later, Melissa called her dispatch to say she was going to stop at the Ramada Hotel, which is now called the Burntwood Hotel. But it's unknown if she stopped at either the arena or the hotel. But at 12:30 a.m., it was noted that Melissa had a fare and 2 passengers inside of her cab, as she traveled eastbound, passing a credit union at the rear entrance of the City Center Mall and into the parking lot beside the south door of the mall. Sometime after this, Melissa was said to have been stabbed to death by the 2 passengers in her cab. It was a cold morning. Keep in mind it's February in northern Manitoba, so snow was covering the ground as the 2 passengers fled across the parking lot after the brutal stabbing. It's said that they fled across a field east of the City Center Mall parking lot, then disappeared in the direction of the Eastwood area of Thompson. Not long after, around 1 a.m., another taxi driver named Ken Rhodes ended up noticing the lights of Melissa's cab glowing in the parking lot. So he decided he was going to go over and say hi and just chat a bit to pass some time until they both got another ride. But instead, he would end up pulling up to Melissa's taxi to find her laying on the pavement deceased. Vigils would end up being held and hundreds of residents would end up showing up. The city was so distraught over Melissa's murder that all 3 taxi companies in Thompson ended up shutting down from 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next morning so that the taxis could line up in that parking lot and, provide warmth for all of the people there at the vigil because it was so cold. Restaurants would donate coffee. The entire town was mourning for Melissa. But remember, she also had a 17-year-old son and 20 to 30 children that she'd fostered over the years that were also mourning her death. And besides that, Melissa's murder was so baffling to the community because she was so loved. She was described as one of the sweetest people. Her manager at the taxi company saying, and I quote, "She was one of the gentlest drivers in the whole industry. If someone didn't have the money, she'd smile and say, 'Pay later.' She never would have gotten into a dispute with someone." End quote. Melissa's murder would end up resulting in a new taxi bylaw in 2006 that required all taxis in Thompson to be equipped with cameras, which most likely would have caught who had murdered Melissa if there had been a camera in her taxi. But it's been nearly 20 years and Melissa's murder is still unsolved. She still has no justice and her family still has no answers. And to this day, it's still such a baffling case because, again, Melissa was the sweetest person. She wouldn't have argued with someone if they didn't have money to pay. She didn't have any disputes with anyone, no enemies. It seemed like she wasn't involved in any nefarious activity. She was just a mother trying to work overtime so that she could buy extra presents for her foster kids and her own child. So why would someone want to stab to death such an innocent woman? There is a $14,000 reward for any information leading to solving Melissa's murder. Her father has also offered $10,000 of his own money. As we know with these cases, there's hardly any information on who murdered Melissa. There's no suspect sketches. There's not even any idea if there truly was only 2 passengers in her car. There's no suspect sketches. We don't know if they were men and women. There's absolutely nothing on who these 2 individuals were in her taxi that night that most likely were the ones to have stabbed her to death. It makes me do wonder, however, because it was winter, if there most likely was snow on the ground, if they may have footprints. But if they do, that has never been revealed. As of right now, it is still completely unknown who was in her taxi that night and why they wanted to murder her. But what I do know is that they may still be walking her streets. Paul, Gordon, Barbara, and Melissa all deserve justice and their families need answers. If you have any information on any of these people's tragic ends, please contact the authorities. I'll have the correct information for each of the police departments to contact for each of these separate cases below. But I also would like to know is what you think about these cases. Do you have any information that I don't know about that I didn't include today? And as always, I'll be in the comment section chatting with you all. My heart goes out to each one of these families. And as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.